Okay, welcome to Economic Puzzles Part 5. This will be our last installment. And we're going to cover 4 different issues here. The first one's called the $10,000 flat screen TV. This is an issue dealing really with sunk costs. The second one is textbook prices and your professor. This is a discussion of differing objective functions and why when people have different objective functions and they're doing business with one another, they often come to very different conclusions about how they should behave. Surprise, surprise, right? The third one deals with studying, and the issue at hand actually is opportunity costs, and we'll talk about that. And the last one is 401k plans increasing participation. And this deals principally with setting the right incentive structure, but it also is a sort of glimpse or a quick glance at the initial taste at behavioral economics. All right, let's start with the first one, the $10,000 flat screen TV. Let's assume that you're pretty rich, obviously to cough up $10,000 for a flat screen TV, you better be, right? And let's say you literally spend that much money. And now you're the first person in the neighborhood, maybe the only person in the neighborhood with one. It's big, and it's big enough to put on the wall, and let's say it's about 6 foot by 10 feet. Pretty big, monstrous flat screen TV. And then a few months down the road, it breaks. But it turns out that you can get it fixed. Now, unfortunately, it's past the warranty, and it will cost you $900 to fix it. Okay, now it's a little less than 10% of the $10,000, but holy cow, $900 seems like a bargain compared to rushing out there and buying another one. But before you do this, before you spend your money, you decide to go online and check out how much do flat screen TVs go, the one that you just bought 6 months ago. And it turns out, I know this is a stretch, but the prices have just absolutely dropped like a rock. And now they are $800. What's the right thing to do? Spend the $900 to get the $10,000 flat screen TV that you bought 6 months ago fixed, or just fork over the $800 and get the same thing? Well, the answer is fork over the $800 and get the same thing. But you'll be surprised how many people still support this as being the correct answer, because they'll argue, well, holy cow, I can't do that. I can't justify all that money that I just spent and not have it fixed. But you don't want to throw good money after bad money. After all, if you fork over $900, yes, you get your flat screen TV back, but you've made yourself worse off by $100. Why? Because you could have simply gotten one brand new for $800. So the $10,000 that you spent, that's a sunk cost. It's irrelevant. It has no determination over what you're going to do next. What matters is the cost that you're about ready to incur, either by fixing the old one or getting a new one. All right, admittedly, this is a dramatic example, but sometimes when you use dramatic examples, a lot like in very powerful novels, you have to exaggerate the circumstances a bit to really wrap your head around a problem. It's easier to understand. Okay, the second one is textbook prices and your professor. Now, at community college, this is less common, but every now and then you will see it. And certainly here at our college, we have professors who have written their own books, and their students are required to use them. But this is very common at universities, in which you'll take a class, and it's a class in government or economics or mathematics, and you're required to use the book that's actually authored by the professor. And a lot of times, and I have heard this actually in class when I was an undergraduate student, in situations just like this, where the professor will apologize for the high price of the book. And he will tell you, gee, he really wishes the price were a lot lower. Now, this just sounds like a con game, right? This just sounds like he's trying to be sympathetic, and it almost sounds phony, right? Except it depends on what the objective function is of the professor and what the objective function is of the publishing company. Now, let's just assume for kicks that a professor receives not a royalty, but a percentage of total revenue. All right, just a percentage of total revenue. Well, what is total revenue? Total revenue is just the price of the textbook times however many you sell, which is Q, P times Q. Great, and you're going to get a cut of that number. And let's just say that it's, say, 10% of total revenue. That's how much you get. Now, the publisher, of course, it has a very different objective function and a different way of looking at this problem. The author's income is maximized when total revenue is maximized, right? Because the bigger this number is, the bigger his cut. But the publisher not only has revenue to contend with, but also has costs to contend with. And so if the publisher is, his objective function, her objective function, is to maximize profit. And of course, profit is total revenue minus total cost. Costs are, of course, of no concern to the author who's just getting a cut of revenue, right? And of course, where this difference is at its maximum is where profits are at its maximum. And that's really what the publisher is seeking to do. But it turns out that profit maximization doesn't occur where necessarily revenue is maximized, right? And as a consequence, that output level is likely to be at much lower level, and it is likely to correspond to a price that's a lot higher. And it would also mean that the author wouldn't be getting as big of a cut, right? Why? Because his cut would be based on a smaller revenue than would be the case if the objective function of the publishing company was to maximize total revenue, which of course, that's not the case. The publisher's goal is to maximize profit, not total revenue. Okay, the third one that we have there is studying. Now, we often hear from our parents and our loved ones, relatives, even sometimes teachers say, hey, look, you got to make the most of your college experience and study really, really hard. And that the more you study, the better you'll do. And that sounds, of course, rational on its face. But I want to set up a sort of stylized example that may get you to think twice about this, right, on a number of levels, right? Let's assume that we can monetize this thing. Let's assume that there's 3 things that you could do with your time on a Friday night. You could study, that's one thing. You could spend time with friends. That's another. And the third is you could just stay home. Stay home and relax. And let's just say, just for kicks, that each of these things has a different monetary value to you. Let's assume that the first one has a monetary value of, let's say, $100. That's the present discounted value of all the future stream of income that you'll earn by studying really hard and making that A on the chemistry test. Spending time with friends is very valuable too, but it's $80. And staying home may only be worth $40 to you. So the question is, which thing should you do? At least according to these opportunity costs. And the answer is, you should do the thing that has the lowest opportunity cost possible, right? So how do we calculate that? Well, if I study, what do I give up? I give up time spent with friends, and I give up time that I could spend just staying home and relaxing. But it can't be both of those things. You only do one thing or the other. So what's the next best available alternative use of your time? It's spending time with your friends, and that's $80. All right, good. So far, studying has an opportunity cost of $80. Now, let's say you decide you want to spend time with your friends. How much does that cost you? Well, that doesn't cost you $40. It costs you $100 because that's the next best available thing that you could do with your time, which is studying. All right, so that doesn't look good. That's more expensive than the first thing. And then lastly, if you stay home, staying home has a value of $40 to you, but the cost to you is not $80, but $100, because that's the next best available alternative use of your time. So if you think about this, spending time with friends cost $100, staying home cost $100, but studying only cost you $80, and the value to you is $100. So it looks like studying is the best use of your time, because it has the lowest opportunity cost of each of those things. So when we think about opportunity cost, we don't think strictly about the benefit, but we're talking about what is the next best available use of one's time. That's really what we mean. Okay, the last one is 401k plans. Now, for those of you who may not know what that is, you've probably heard of it, and you probably know that it has something to do with retirement. And so if you know that much, you know really enough to really be able to understand this example. But 401k plans were authorized by congressional law, I believe back in the early 70s, to allow companies to be able to offer retirement plans for their employees, which would be exempt from taxation until the employee decides to start taking disbursements from those funds. And a lot of employers not only set up these funds so that their employees could have a tax shelter from them until retirement, or it's called really more technically tax deferment, but sometimes employers will compensate employees $1 for dollar matching, or $1.50 for or 50 cents on the dollar, but some kind of a matching. And let's say it's $1 for dollar. Well, a lot of companies recognized that after years of having these plans in place, they only had like 30% participation. And they just couldn't understand it, because this violates all economic rationality concerning not leaving money on the table. This is essentially what you're doing, is leaving money on the table, because there's all these dollars that you could have been investing, and they're accruing on a tax-deferred basis. You're not paying taxes on them now, and not paying until a future date when you retire, in which case you're likely to be in a lower income tax category, lower income tax bracket. Well, it turns out that when consultants were brought in to study this whole thing, they asked employers a very simple question. That is this an opt-in plan or an opt-out plan? And they go, well, what do you mean? He says, well, opt-in means that you're not in the plan unless you go to Human Resources and you sign up. You go to the benefits office and sign up. And so, oh, well, we're in an opt-in plan. You have to sign up to be a part of the plan. Oh. Okay, well, what does opt-out mean? Well, opt-out just means that you're already in the plan automatically when you get hired, and you have to actually go to the Human Resources office or the benefits office and sign a paper that says, I don't want to participate. That's called opt-out. And so the consultants told these companies, hey, if you want to see your participations right, participation levels for your 401k plan go up, all you got to do is move to an opt-out. That is, that everybody is automatically in, but if they want out, they have to take the trouble of going to the Human Resources office and sign those opt-out papers. Well, it turns out that when you use in as an automatic default, that the participation levels are going to be a lot higher, because people have to consciously think about going down there to take themselves out. But people are not likely to consciously think about going down there to put themselves in. And so the numbers went up dramatically. And most firms have, and most companies, and even nonprofits have opt-outs. That is, you're automatically in, and you have to be signed out. And we really have behavioral economists to thank for this breakthrough. And I bring this up as the final example in this 5-part series, because you're going to discover that behavioral economics has quite a bit to contribute to the profession and is not something that is merely just an add-on. Okay, well, that wraps up this series. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time.